Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, everyone. So today, inshallah, we're going to be continuing Tafseer for Surah Al-Baqarah. And last time, we were actually talking about the way that Bani Israel had related with, the way they related with the revelation of the Prophet ﷺ, the way they related with Musa's revelation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling the Prophet ﷺ that the way they related with Musa's revelation is really not going to be any different from how they're relating with the Prophet's revelation. First, that they had even asked for things that they already know were impossible as within their, of course, as human beings to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then it talked about how when they were even given certain legislatures that they were supposed to be abiding by, how they continued to reinterpret the wordings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how even when they had seen the miracles, they were so blinded from seeing the truth. And even when they saw the truth, they basically went and wanted to replicate the different people that they were surrounding, which were basically the people of the Canaaniyin, and how they related with the wahi. So here was a question: who are as-Sabi'in? So as-Sabi'in, which is basically mentioned in this ayah, they're basically a religious group. They're a religious group that were known in the Arabian Peninsula. They still are known, although they're a very small minority in Iraq. But at the time, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were Sabi'ah throughout the Arabian Peninsula. The Sabi'ah, they were known for worshiping the things like in space, meaning they were known for worshiping things like stars, different universes, or believing that the stars or the moons or different things in space were responsible or were somehow getting some power, direct power, to act on people's lives. In other words, it was a direct energy from Allah Almighty, and that these celestial beings, or these, whether we're talking about planets or stars, they had some form of power to affect people's lives. So they used to worship the stars, the planets, etc. They used to worship these things, and that was something that they used to connect to, which is the different stars and different things in space. And the Sabi'in were known in the Arabian Peninsula. In fact, the Prophet's great grandfather was actually part of the Sabi'in. That's why he was actually called Ibn Abi Kabsha. They attributed him to his mother's grandfather, who was actually part of a Sabi'in. So they thought that the Prophet ﷺ, with Islam, that it was an inspiration from a Sabi'ah, from his great grandfather, maternal grandfather, and that Islam was actually part and traces back to Sabi'in. And of course, the Arab, they used to think that they used to call the Muslims as Sabi'in. They didn't know much about that religion, so they just knew that it was relating to something about Ismawat, something that was relating to the skies, something relating to that. So they actually accused the Muslims of being part or a sect from a Sabi'ah. They accused them being a sect from Sabi'ah. Sabi'ah, they might have had a prophet, and later they, just like in Nasara, just like the Christians had a prophet, Prophet Isa alayhi salam, and then they reinterpreted the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and started practicing something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like the Christians, where yes, Prophet Isa alayhi salam is a prophet of Allah, but then instead of worshiping Allah, they started worshiping Isa himself alayhi salam. So we're Sabi'as as such. Differences of opinions. We don't really know if there was a real prophet that was sent on to them, and then later they reinterpreted the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is for Sabi'in. Until the time of today, we know that they're a very small minority, very, very small minority that doesn't even that doesn't even count, but just a couple thousands of Sabi'a in Iraq and Iran. Sabi'a, they generally practice. There is a special leader for them. They bury just like Muslims. They also would, they would do with the dead, for example, deal with the dead, or even deal with a number of different things with prayer. There's a certain, it's kind of like really similar to wudu. So they do have some similarities with Islam, but when it comes to Aqidah and a lot of the practices, they're totally different. Even when Aqidah, you look at the practice, it's totally different. Even when we're speaking about marriage, they only marry from their own ta'ifa, only from their own cult. So Sabi'in, like I said, that was, by the way, when Khalid ibn al-Walid actually went into one of the battles, the people there, they just said Sabatna, Sabatna, and Khalid ibn al-Walid actually still killed them. And the Prophet ﷺ, for a couple of days, he continued to say, Ya Allah, I'm innocent. In other words, I am free. This does not represent me. In other words, in today's discourse, that this does not represent me. This does not represent me. This does not represent me or Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ told Khalid ibn al-Walid, why did you kill them even though they said Sabatna? So they didn't say Aslamna, they actually said Sabatna. But what they meant by that, they actually meant that they had actually become Muslim. But the Prophet ﷺ said, this doesn't represent me, and separated himself from Khalid's action, at least in that incident. And the Prophet ﷺ told him that he should not have done that, because they had actually become Muslim, even though they said the word Sabatna and not necessarily Aslamna. So that was number one. Number two, even though they said Sabatna, it doesn't mean that Islam is a Sabi'a, because it's a totally different religion. But they thought that Islam was related to a Sabi'a. It was a common thing that people associated the Muslims and associated Islam with this religion, even though it's a totally separate religion that was known in Persia, and also the Arabian Peninsula. So that was to answer the question about a Sabi'a. So to continue with what we were doing last time, so that was answering the question before. To continue with what we were talking about before, of course, it's continuing. وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ وَرَفَعْنَا فَوْقَكُمُ الطُّورَ خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ. And of course, this was actually in continuance with how the ayat were before. وَإِذْ, and of course, وَإِذْ, it's basically reminding them. So here's وَإِذْ right there. And we got a couple wa'ids in order to remind the people of Bani Israel of what they had actually done. And it's also number two. So one, it's to remind Bani Israel of what they had done. And this is not necessarily just to sham or just to shame Bani Israel, but this is in order to also speak even to the Muslims that might actually act in that way, in how they should realize and recognize that this is a form of distancing oneself away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why you could see this ayah, even though it was, right after when it was talking about Bani Israel, it was including إن الذين آمنوا والذين هادوا والنصارى والصابئين من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر. So in the end, regardless whether they're the Jews, the Christians, or even the Sabi'a, and anybody that would embrace the main tenets of faith, which is belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Judgment Day, and do righteousness, that then they will be rewarded. فَلَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. Then the reward is going to be that they will be rewarded with Allah Almighty, whether in the Akhirah, or they would be rewarded in the Akhirah, in Akhirah and Dunya, of course. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. And they would not feel the fear, and they would not feel any sorrow and sadness. So we talked about that one before people start getting sleepy. وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ وَرَفَعْنَا فَوْقَكُمُ الطُّورَ خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ واذكروا ما فيه لعلكم تتقون. Now, this actually reminds me, and it takes me back to an ayah that we actually went to before. So, أخذنا ميثاقكم. And what is الميثاق? We talked about الميثاق before, right there. وإذ أخذنا ميثاق بني إسرائيل لا تعبدون إلا الله وبالوالدين إحسانا. So, what is الميثاق? الميثاق is actually an agreement. So, there was an agreement between mankind and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there was an agreement between Bani Israel and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there was an agreement even between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a Muslim. What is that agreement? Well, the first agreement between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ, when your Lord Almighty had taken from the backs of the children of Adam, وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ, and made them witnesses upon themselves. Am I not your Lord? And they said, Bala, verily. أَن تَقُولُوا, yet on Judgment Day, they will just say, we were pacified away from that. So what really is that convent? So that's more of a mithaq, in where a mithaq is a convent, it's an agreement. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds Bani Israel, what did that agreement really contain? The agreement contained that they would only worship Allah Almighty, they would respect their parents, and they would respect their relatives, they would respect the orphans, they would respect the needy, and they would speak good with people. In other words, they would act kindly, and especially in terms of tongue. And this is really important when we're talking about akhlaq. Akhlaq mainly comes from what you say. Akhlaq mainly, like, yes, what you do is part of akhlaq, but what you say is considered like the top of the akhlaq. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ. Notice that. Let's look at this ayah right there. All right, let's look at it. So let's look at this ayah. So here, لا تعبدون إلا الله. All right, this is the tenet of faith. Then when it comes to akhlaq, بالوالدين إحسانا, act kindly to the parents, kindly to your relatives, kindly to the needy, and to the orphans, and kindly to the needy. I want you to look at this ayah, because when we're talking about akhlaq, all right, when we're talking about akhlaq, the first part of akhlaq is when you recognize Allah Almighty. The second part of akhlaq is really when you recognize the ones that were really a reason for your existence, your parents. And then the third part of your akhlaq are really your relatives, al-aqrabin, your relatives, your brothers, your sisters. And this is really important to mention, is that it's a lot easier to maintain good akhlaq with strangers than actually relatives. Why? Because relatives usually transgress the limit with you more, because your haiba and your honor with your relatives is taken away. So, for example, people don't see you as necessarily Dr. X or Y or Z, or they don't see you as, this person that you would act with and act in front of it, necessarily in a professional way or somehow, a formal way. And they would really see you in your normal human way, and your, those moments where you might lose your temper, etc. So they really see you differently. So all that probably maintains a certain level of respect and honor that you see from strangers, al-aqrabin usually don't see that. The relatives, they usually don't see that about you. They just see the normal human side of you, and not the formal, very formal or very professional side of you. They see you in that way. And that's why maintaining akhlaq, really, one, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two, well, that requires when you're in secret, when you're in private, your private moments, when you're in public moments, that's the akhlaq, that's the highest of akhlaq. Then wal walidain, well, that's because you as a human being, you tend to cross boundaries more with your parents than actually with someone else. Why? Because we tend to take advantage of our parents' mercy, of our parents' care, of our parents' love, and it's so easy to transgress those boundaries. So that's why when it comes to akhlaq, maintaining akhlaq with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by not abusing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, and then by not abusing the parents' mercy and the parents and the parents' mercy and the parents' affection. Al-aqrabin, by not abusing, and of course, a lot of times al-aqrabin, we
Assalamu alaikum. We cannot hear anything.
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Aisha. Are you still there? We can't hear you. Hello?
Maybe it has taken her out because I cannot see her.
Yeah, her icon is gone.
Let's just wait, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I just ring her up, so I think she maybe not noticed that it was off from her side.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, everyone. I actually lost my laptop. It just died out on me, and here I am. I'm back.
No problem.
All right. So let's continue right there. So when we're looking at this ayah, so we're looking at a number of different akhlaq that it basically talks about, which is you've got number one, worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two, parents, and of course the relatives. When we're talking about the relatives, of course we tend to take advantage of the relatives because it is actually hardest to maintain good akhlaq with your relatives, with your siblings and the relatives, than it's actually the strangers. Why? Because the relatives, they tend to cross their boundaries, like we had mentioned earlier, and the relatives, they're actually a lot more responsibilities towards relatives than actually the strangers. And that's why when we see that the relatives are crossing their boundaries with us, it's actually harder to maintain good akhlaq by giving up on a lot of the different transgressions that happened against us. My brother, for example, my sister, they might have crossed the boundary with me, but then I still have to live up to the akhlaq, even though they were the most ones that actually crossed the limit with me, or with, this is not speaking about myself, but this is, hypothetically speaking. وَالْيَتَامَى, because they are the weakest. So yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is here, not the weakest, but the one that you tend to take advantage of. But you could see that when it comes to akhlaq, after speaking about الوالدين, the relatives, the orphans, and the masakin, you could see that they have some form of weakness. And usually those that have forms of weakness are usually the ones to be taken advantage of. The ones to be taken advantage of are really those that are weaker. Parents, with age, they're weaker. With age, they have definitely lost the power to give you orders. Lil qurba, because of you being a relative to them, they had crossed their boundary, and many times it becomes a challenging thing to actually maintain a relationship, a good relationship, maintain al-akhlaq with their relatives, maintain al-akhlaq with the orphans, because we can find it a lot easier with orphans not having anyone to support them and to protect them. We tend to find it easier to take advantage and cross our boundaries with them because we don't fear any consequence when we actually cross the boundaries with them. Same thing with al-masakin. Al-masakin, they don't have any financial power. Economical poverty can definitely break your not only financial, but economical power brings in a lot of tribal power, brings in another form of authority within the community. That's why when you see people like Trump or different rich people like Bill Gates, how did these people, so you have the money, but the money actually gave them a form of a political power around people. Same thing when we're talking about fame. You're looking at the celebrities, etc. They all of a sudden had, even though they're just actors, but they had some form of power in the hearts of people, or even when it comes to getting into political power and making decisions on politics. So you see Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was just an actor. How did he all of a sudden become a person that was qualified or suitable to be in a position, be like a governor or in such positions? Well, it was actually having some political power by getting the money power, by getting the financial power. Il-masakin. So if you would have power because you had the money, similarly, if you don't have the money, people will actually take advantage of you because you don't have the political/social power or social authority to maintain and preserve your rights. وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. قُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. This is on the top of al-akhlaq, even though akhlaq actually involves our actions, the fi'l, and it involves the qawl. But Islam, definitely actions and what you say, but Islam actually went farther in considering akhlaq and said it includes the intention. It includes the intention. So not only what you behave in or what you say, but it includes what your heart also conceals. So Islam here in the ayah emphasized that akhlaq, when it comes to akhlaq, on top of that emphasis is really what you say. قُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. Speak to people in kind words. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ. Now here's the thing, is that even though إقامة الصلاة and doing salah and zakah is actually on top of the akhlaq, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching Bani Israel that al-mithaq, and that the foundation of Iman and the foundation of akhlaq and Islam is really in amanu wa amilu salihat. All right, amanu wa amilu salihat, and actually continue. So here's amanu. That's basically belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then amilu salihat. What is amilu salihat? It's basically defined as how you treat your parents, how you treat your relatives, how you treat the orphans, how you treat those that are needy out there, and how you use your verbal akhlaq in. And of course, then it will talk about the spiritual side of akhlaq. Aqimu salah, perform the salah and do the zakah. ثم توليتم. So this is talking about then Bani Israel. So this part of it is exclusive to Bani Israel. But when it comes to understanding what is al-mithaq, what is the agreement, what does it mean to apply Islam, what is really the convent that we are actually asked to do. So now we take, again, because this is really common in the Quran where it's talking about mithaq Bani Israel, I want to remember this word. The word is mithaq, and of course mithaq means convent, and the mithaq also means an agreement, and the mithaq right here, of course, is really referring to the mithaq that was taken on Bani Israel. So let's go back to the ayat that we were in Surah 6, in Surah Al-Baqarah, again, ayah number 62. I hope you guys didn't forget about it, because that's where we're at. So let's see again. So the ayah that we were in before, and now we're actually looking at this ayah 63 that was referring to al-mithaq. وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ. What was their convent? What was the agreement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken on Bani Israel? But Bani Israel, they were supposed to relate with this agreement. In other words, they were supposed to relate in a specific way. What happened? They were supposed to خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ. They were supposed to apply it. The word is biquwa. Biquwa means with power, but it doesn't literally mean with power. This is more a metaphor to actually mean that when you apply the words, you are applying it with full power. And when we talk about power, we're actually talking about three different things, because quwwa means courage. Quwwa also means one, confidence. So let's write it down. I hope my screen will allow me to do that. So this is talking about confidence. When you're applied it with confidence, that actually means there's going to be some pain within it. That's why it required quwwa. That's why it required strength. So when you say there has to be some pain, that means there's going to be some patience involved. When you talk about patience involved, that means that you're going to leave something to gain something. In other words, when you're talking about quwwa, you're talking about being steadfast. You're talking about being steadfast. So let's do it again. When we're talking about biquwwa, it involves confidence and faith in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent onto them, which is al-mithaq, which is the legislature. Two, it also involves that there would be patience, and patience actually means you give up and you maintain, even though there is some pain, but you still hang on for a greater and a larger gain. No pain, no gain. Of course, you need to understand that there's going to be some pain, but that's not enough, because you will gain at the end in the akhirah, or at least in your life where there's no khawf and there's no fear, but that's still on a condition that you will stay steadfast. It is very common that I would get sisters calling me and they would say, I made the dua, but I didn't get the answer yet. I wore the hijab, but nothing changed in my deen. I wore the niqab and whatever it is. I've been praying for a couple months. I don't feel any difference, etc. It actually takes a lot longer than actually a month or two, or even, by the way, it's not about time. Somebody can be doing it for years and still not actually get to the level of Iman. And somebody can be getting to the level of Iman within a couple of hours. It's not about how much you do, but how much you do does help you getting into the khushu'ah, does help you get into the khashya, but it's not about how long you've been doing it. It's about how, one, we're looking at ikhlas. Number one, we're looking at sincerity, and Number two, we're looking at, of course, when we're looking at ikhlas, we're talking about how much of a khushu' was there, how much of involved, and along with the sincerity, how much did you really get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Did you really feel the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, that khushu' is really relating to your Islam, the level of Iman, and the level of Ihsan. The level of Islam is really just the threshold of your closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the level of Iman, it's when your faith has really started affecting your emotions, has really started affecting your heart, has really gone to the core of your Islam. When you're looking at Islam, it's really just affecting you on the outside. Yeah, you started praying, you started fasting, probably wearing hijab, you started, adding some different legislatures here and there, but Iman is a different level. Because Iman, it actually involves where, for the mu'mineen, it involved that the person, when they practice it and they live the practice. They feel the practice. They enjoy the practice. She's enjoying salah. She's enjoying being with those salihin. She's enjoying reading Quran. She's enjoying staying away from haram. That's a level of Iman, literally enjoying it. And that's why Iman is when when you see that hadith, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where the Prophet said, described Iman, and tu'mina billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawmil akhir, etc. And it becomes a different vision. It becomes a vision that is different than the vision of Islam. The vision of Islam is affecting your behavior, but the vision of Iman is affecting you on the core of your behavior, which is your heart. It's making you see the world differently. You're relating to the unseen differently. Now, Ihsan, on the other hand, is actually the highest level of khushu', in where you're worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you could actually see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is that even relating to any of this? So here, when you look at that, they were ordered to do خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ, the mithaq, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not just to be taken as if, yeah, well, Allah said, and that's it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasized that when you take his words, you take them with full strength. With full strength, meaning confidence, meaning enduring the pain and being patient, meaning being steadfast. This is what being patient and being courageous and being confident, or in one word, with having quwwah, in applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ. It's not enough to actually just take the words in strength. There's also one side of it, is that yes, you can believe in it, yes, you can apply it, but that's not enough. You have to also announce it, وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ, and say all the things that are in it. You have to believe in announcing that, in other words, making it as the words that you would tell others about it. In other words, you don't change the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ. What does that actually involve? Number one, that you announce it to others. You, in other words, announce it to others. That means you do the da'wah. Number two, you don't just do the da'wah, but you also defend it. And this is really important. It's not enough to just do the da'wah and just go talk about it, but you also have to defend it How do I actually defend it? Well, you defend it by, one, standing against the misconceptions and understanding those misconceptions and clarifying those misconceptions. Two, not getting weak when others would actually bring about an opposing idea, that you would actually understand that you would have to be in that quwwah, in that strength, that when others are trying to impose their ideas or impose their arguments, that you would not actually be weak in front of it, but you would stand strong and you would be confident and you would be steadfast when others are trying to impose an opposing philosophy, idea. They can call it whatever they want, political pressure, all these different things. Using political correctness has no place in Islam, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you right there, خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ. Part of, even though when you look at the word خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ, if a person is taking any word in a strong manner, that should mean that you are announcing it. But that's why this ayah is emphasizing that part of how you take it and you apply it with all the full confidence that we talked about earlier, there's that emphasis, وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, and announce it and tell it to others and teach it and preach it to others, and make sure that others are also aware of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent. So what happened? وَرَفَعْنَا فَوْقَكُمُ الطُّورَ. What happened? The people of Bani Israel, they were in doubt. One, we mentioned earlier, they were in doubt in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually made them see أخذتكم الصاعقة. We saw that in the previous lectures. Two, they were then in doubt of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَرَفَعْنَا فَوْقَكُمُ الطُّورَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had risen the mountain. The word Tur actually means mountain, but that doesn't mean that the mountain itself was rooted or uprooted from its base and put up above them. But رَفَعْنَا فَوْقَكُمُ الطُّورَ, in where they had seen the mountain tremble, and it seemed like it was more of a volcano, and which is why in Surah Al-A'raf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the mountain was shaken, and of course, كَأَنَّهُ ظُلَّ, as if it was a huge and a massive cloud. When you look at a huge, massive cloud, this is actually talking about a volcano, so that mountain was shaken. It was made into a huge, big cloud right up above them. It seems like it was a cloud eruption that was right up above them in order for them to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So what do we take out of all of this? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. In order for anyone to actually gain the level of taqwa, they actually need to do a number of different things. Number one, they need to consider Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words. أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ. Need to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. Two, that they have to take the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with full confidence, and of course, apply it thoroughly. And of course, وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ. And they have to be strong in defending those words. Be strong in announcing it, even in public and even on themselves. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. That is what brings in taqwa. And that's what we're actually missing within the Muslim community today. Our fear to speak up the truth is right there. To speak up the truth and to actually stand in confidence, and especially during our times today with the postmodern, I would say atheist type of imposing a narrative in where it's all based on mockery. It's all based on making you lose that that it's like a psychological enforce or psychological force that is on you by mocking the religion, mocking anything that the religion stands on, as a way to not necessarily do they have an argument instead of it, but that's more of trying to take away your confidence in your deen in order to impose a new psychological war on you. So Islam is telling you, wait a minute, you have to actually stand strong in announcing the words, living the words, despite all the objection that you might actually find against you. So how did Bani Israel actually relate to this? ثُمَّ تَوَلَّيْتُمْ. So yes, this is talking about Bani Israel, but remember, when we're talking about Bani Israel, these ayat are not telling us about Bani Israel because let's talk about the Jews and make fun of them. This is actually talking about a pattern that you will also find within the Ummah. You will find within the Ummah, and what happened to Bani Israel might actually, and in fact, it did happen to the Ummah and to the Muslim community as well. ثم توليتم. Then توليتم actually means turn back. So then they turned back. That is Bani Israel after that. What does that mean? That means that for some time they did indeed were practicing the words بقوة. They were applying it with full power, with full strength, with full defense. But what happened? Later, that wasn't the case. Later, that changed. And this can happen even in one's own life. They will be standing to defend Islam with full power, but then later, it can actually change because of a number of different fitnas. Let's say, فَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَكُنْتُمْ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Bani Israel, later, they did actually give up on the message. Later, they weren't acting in that strength. Later, they didn't announce it as they were supposed to be. فَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ. If it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and his fadl is basically like a blessing. And if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, لَكُنْتُم مِّنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. You would have been amongst those that are losers. وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْتُمُ الَّذِينَ اعْتَدَوْا مِنْكُمْ فِي السَّبْتِ. Now this is actually continuing, but here's one thing. It didn't actually say وَإِذْ. Why? A number of reasons why it didn't say وَإِذْ, even though it is actually continuing with the same idea. That وَإِذْ was more of speaking about the patterns of the different miracles. But here, وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْتُمُ الَّذِينَ اعْتَدَوْا مِنْكُمْ فِي السَّبْتِ. You knew, I'm going to translate it, that's just a surface translation. And you had already known those that had transgressed the limit on Saturday, and they were told to be monkeys and regress, in other words, become in a form of regression and become into, of course, this is more of a curse and turned into monkeys. So a number of different questions here. وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْتُمْ. Why didn't it say وَإِذْ? Number one is that وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْتُمْ, the story of Bani Israel turning into apes or turning into monkeys, some of the groups of Bani Israel turning into monkeys was not actually mentioned in the scriptures of Bani Israel. But it was a verbal and an oral narration that was passed on from one generation to another by Bani Israel, but it was not actually mentioned in their scripture. And that's why the ayah says, وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْتُمْ. In other words, you guys were familiar with that story. You knew how the story was transmitted from one generation to another. الَّذِينَ اعْتَدَوْا مِنْكُمْ فِي السَّبْتِ. What was the story about? The story was about part of Bani Israel. They had a certain day, just like for Muslims on Friday, they were supposed to be doing a form of worship or Salat al-Jumu'ah, etc. In other words, it was designated as a day of worship and not a day of business. So the people of Bani Israel, they were ordered to make the day of Sabt a day designated only for worship, and they cannot do any business in it. But what they did is that they started putting nets. They were clearly fishermen. So the fishermen started putting nets and setting up those nets on Friday in order for those nets to catch the fish that they were not allowed to catch on a Saturday. And then on Sunday, they would gather those nets and basically have all the fish that was there on Saturday. So that was a form of manipulation. That was a form of hila. So what does that actually mean? And what does that have to do with the other ayah? Remember the ayah when it says, خُذُوا مَا أَتَيْنَكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ, take what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered you to take بِقُوَّةٍ. Well, let's see. This is exactly what this ayah is referring to. There was going to be a form of losing. Remember when we said there needs to be confidence, there's going to be some patience because there's going to be some pain, and in order to be to maintain that quwwah, you have to be steadfast. Well, that's the same thing right here. What they did is that they went. Yes, they understood the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they were in a rush to get the gain, and they could not hold against losing the fish on Saturday. They were concerned about their business. They were concerned about the gain. So they did not have the patience, and this is really important to mention. They lost the patience. They lost their patience from feeling that they're losing on that fish on that day. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it i'tida. This is a form of transgression. So what does that mean? When we're speaking about quwwah, if you lose confidence, this is the word confidence, maybe I should write it clearer, all right? Whether you lose confidence, where'd it go? Whether you lose confidence, all right, or whether you rush in gaining and you lose on your patience, or you lose on being steadfast, it's all going to be a form of i'tida. It's all going to be a form of transgression. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us the story. وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْتُمُ الَّذِينَ اعْتَدَوْا مِنْكُمْ فِي السَّبْتِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding Bani Israel, you knew the people that had transgressed on a Saturday when they lost the patience and did not want to lose on anything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and were concerned about gaining and did not want to lose, or at least on any of the fish. What happened? فَقُلْنَا لَهُمْ كُونُوا قِرْدَةً خَاسِئِينَ. Now, the other part of when we look at the word i'tadaw, you could see, yes, it means transgression, but it also means that they were not steadfast on the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it actually means it became an action after an action, as in Surah Al-A'raf, actually clarifies that part and said that they were actually three different groups. The first group, they saw what they were doing and they started replicating their act. The second group, they started telling them that they should not do that type of hila, that type of manipulating and reinterpreting the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they should be strong in applying the word of Allah Almighty, and they should be steadfast. So the second group was actually, in other words, telling the first group they shouldn't be doing that. The third group, they started scolding and deterring the second group, which was basically making the da'wah, and telling them that they were just wasting their time trying to tell the first group, which are the people that were doing the wronghood, they were wasting their time. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes the first group, the ones that were doing the wrong act, and punished the third group that was telling the second group that was doing the da'wah to not do the da'wah because there was no hope in them. All right. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the second group, the one that was doing the da'wah, when they were told, why are you wasting your time when giving them da'wah? And they just responded, ma'dhiratan ila rabbikum. This is just an excuse in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we tried to do something about it. وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. And hopefully, maybe they will stand and they will apply guidance. Maybe their religious integrity will actually stand again and wake up. But that's why when we look at the part about steadfast, the only reason why they were cursed into monkeys was really because, one, they knew the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They didn't take it biquwwa. They were not patient in applying the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And instead of being steadfast on applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instead, they actually continued it one after another. And it became a culture to set those nets in order to catch the fish on the other day. So that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when it became a culture, when it became a common act, that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said, فَقُلْنَا لَهُمْ كُونُوا قِرَدَةً, and become monkeys. So here's the thing. I'm just going to discuss this because it's a very common question that people ask me. So the monkeys that we have today, are those necessarily Bani Israel, the children of Bani Israel? All right. Although scholars had differences of opinions on things like qirada, like monkeys, and apes, and elephants, and what's it called, and dub, or even the type of lizards that are actually in the desert, or even al-khanazir, which are pigs. All right. Now, one thing is that we do have a hadith in Sahih Muslim that was narrated by Ibn Mas'ud, that those that were cursed into qirada, that were cursed into becoming monkeys, they did not actually reproduce. So they didn't reproduce. And in fact, they only lived for 3 days. The other discussion was turning them into apes or monkeys, was that to their souls, or was that to their mind, or was that to their body? In other words, they had a body of a monkey, but their intellect was like a human. They understood what happened. That was the majority of the scholars and what they said, that their body was formed into a monkey's body, but they really understood the punishment and what that meant. The second tafsir is that no, they were transformed into the mind. In other words, their brains, their intellect had a type of regression where they started becoming, in their mental and their intellectual and cognitive skills, like monkeys, and they only lived for 3 days. So regardless, what we know is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually let the others know, he let the others know that those that had transgressed the limit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told them not to do, which is to implement the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that they should not be fishing on Saturday, that they had transgressed the limit. And then when they were turned into monkeys, it was more, yes, a punishment for them, but it was also for a punishment for those that were witnessing what had happened. So this, when we say bayna yadayha wa ma khalfaha, this is actually a metaphor to mean that this is a lesson. So they were cursed into monkeys as a lesson. Yes, a punishment for them, for the people that transgress the limit, but also as a lesson for those. This is the metaphor right there. So this is a lesson for all those that had witnessed, for the people to come and the people that were present to remember that by transgressing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will be cursed. So why were they cursed into monkeys and not probably into flowers or who knows what it is? All right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahu alam, why curse them into monkeys? Did they go in a form of regression to living and acting like animals in their behavior? Is that really the lesson for them to learn? So Allahu alam, really, we just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cursed them in that, and Bani Israel knew the story. وَمَوْعِظَةً لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and it was a maw'idha. The word maw'idha, it was a lesson for those al-muttaqeen, for those that, so wait a minute, if they're muttaqeen, why would it be a lesson for them? But they're already muttaqeen. Why would it be a lesson for them? So this is really important to mention, is that even if you're a muttaqi, even if you are a person of religion, of a person practicing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you still need a reminder. All right. So when somebody tells you ittaqillah, it doesn't mean that they're accusing you of not having or lacking taqwa or religious integrity. So il-muttaqi, no matter how religious you are, you still need a reminder. No matter how many PhDs you have in Sharia, no matter how many qira'at you memorize, you still need a reminder. You're still a human being and you still need a reminder. وَمَوْعِظَةً لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. You know, I get this very often where people will say, oh, you're a sheikha, you don't need anybody to tell you. Yes, I do. Every single person does. You still need to remind, even if it's a sheikh, no matter who that person is, they still need a reminder. وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْبَحُوا بَقَرَةً. So what is the other story? So the other story, notice that it's actually continuing with the same pattern. وَإِذْ قَالَ, and remember when you see وَإِذْ, that means, and remember when Musa told his people, وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ, when people told his people that Allah Almighty orders them, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ, that the Lord Almighty orders you to slaughter a cow. قالوا, they responded to it, أتتخذنا هزوا, are you making fun of us? Are you making a joke, in other words? قال أعوذ بالله أن أكون من الجاهلين. I seek refuge in Allah Almighty to be amongst those that are jahilin. Jahilin can mean one. Jahilin can mean immature. Jahil can also mean a person that's transgressing the limit as well, meaning a person that is connected to materialism. And jahil can also mean ignorant. So immature or ignorant, or also a person that is living materialistic life and not living the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's just look into these ayat right there really quick. إِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders Musa orders his people to slaughter a cow. But then we look at the ayah in where they responded that, are you taking us in a place of ridicule? In other words, are you saying something silly? Are you being silly? Are you being ridiculous here? What do you mean slaughter a cow? That's so ridiculous. In other words, this is what they wanted to say. This is so ridiculous. So that's why Prophet Musa alayhi salam responds, أعوذ بالله أن أكون من الجاهلين, to mean one. When you look at the way Prophet Musa alayhi salam responds, you could see that their rejection of calling Prophet Musa alayhi salam as making fun or saying a form of a joke, even though it was actually the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number one is that the word jahilin can mean to actually connect to materialistic things and not connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, when he had connected with the materialistic side, and he said, Inna bini min ahli, my son is part of my people, is part of my family. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Innahu laysa min ahlik, he's not part of your family. Innahu amalun ghayru salih. The action is not a pious action. it's a deviation. إني أعظك أن تكون من الجاهلين. Here's again the word الجاهلين. So does it mean kafirin? Or does it mean to connect to materialistic things and rather than connect on to the reasons of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So here, when you look at إني قال أعوذ بالله أن أكون من الجاهلين, in where Allah, the Prophet Musa alayhi salam was actually teaching Bani Israel a lesson that ridiculing the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a form of kufr. Two, calling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's orders, and making Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's orders, and accusing the Prophet of being ridiculous is actually in itself a form of kufr. Two, so what's a kufr? Kufr, ridiculing the Sharia itself. Two, ridiculing the Prophet or accusing the Prophet of doing something ridiculous. Three, going against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in applying his Sharia. That's also a form of Jahiliyyah. All right? Three things. Should we do it again? Let's do it again. Three things. The word Jahilin, not applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a form of Jahiliyyah. Two, accusing the Prophet of making a silly joke, or accusing the Prophet of, or accusing the Prophet or even speaking about the Sharia itself, or making fun of Sharia itself is a form of kufr itself. And here, Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he said, "A'udhu billahi an akuna min al-jahilin." Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that he is saying, well, I don't want to be part of you because you're rejecting the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or is he saying, A'udhu billahi an akuna min al-jahilin, that I would make silly jokes on Allah? It's actually both. It's actually both. Why? Because he said, A'udhu billahi an akuna min al-jahilin, that when they said, are you here ridiculing us? What does that mean? Are you making fun of us? What does that mean? Well, that's actually meaning that they were refusing to take the Prophet seriously. So here, anybody that ridicules, let's even go farther. Not only ridiculing Sharia or making fun of Sharia or making fun of the Prophet, but even making fun of the mu'mineen. What? The people? Mu'mineen? Yes. When in Surah Al-Tawbah, the munafiqeen, they started speaking about al-mu'mineen. They said, the mu'mineen, they said, those that are actually, those that are the most ones to memorize the Quran, and those ones that are, the mu'mineen, they knew them, all right? They said, they're the weakest of us. They're the least to be courageous during the battle. They're the most to eat, and then the most they're the latest to come to battle, etc. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said that قَدْ كَفَرْتُمْ بَعْدَ, you had become a kafir after you had become Muslim. قَدْ كَفَرْتُمْ بعد إسلامكم. You had become a kafir. So ridiculing not only Sharia, but even if you're ridiculing, for example, muhajjabat. Oh, those muhajjaba, those girls in hijabs, they have a habit of such and such. Or those people that go to the masjid, or those people that the religious people, and making fun of their beard, or making fun of their clothes or their attire, or making fun of the dua, or making fun of the shuyukh, or making fun, etc. This is actually a form of kufr, because the intention is not necessarily to ridicule or speak about the person per se, but it's in order to associate that the religion is making them be in such a form. So here when we talk about قَالَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ أَنْ أَكُونَ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ, Prophet Musa alayhi salam is teaching them right there that what you had just committed was actually a form of kufr on the spot. But they wanted to show that they were still somehow obedient, that they were somehow, we didn't give up on you yet. All right, so what do? قالوا ادع لنا ربك يبين لنا ما هي. They said, so call on your Lord Almighty and tell him to clarify for us what this cow looks like. What is this cow? قال إنه يقول إنها بقرة لا فارض ولا بكر عوان بين ذلك. He said, this cow, in terms of age, because whenever you go to a farmer, the first thing that the farmer is going to ask you is, what type of an animal do you need? So here it is. We know it's a cow. Number two, he wants to ask the age. So Prophet Musa alayhi salam clarifies that in terms of age, it's not a very old cow and it's not a young cow, not a very young cow. It's in between that. عوان بين ذلك. It's in between that. فافعلوا ما تؤمرون. Simple and straightforward. All you need to do, just do what Allah Almighty is ordering you, slaughter a cow, and we gave you one simple description, which is that it's not too old and not too young. قالوا ادع لنا ربك. Now, what did they say? They didn't say قالوا ادع لنا ربنا. They didn't say call on to our Lord Almighty. They just wanted to somehow disassociate themselves with Prophet Musa alayhi salam by saying, call your Lord Almighty. Disassociate themselves from Musa and from Allah Almighty. So they said, call your Lord in order to tell us what color is it. Prophet Musa alayhi salam responds, قال إنه يقول إنها بقرة صفراء. He said, it's a yellow, but the word yellow, it doesn't mean yellow in Arabic. Yellow, the word safra, can also mean an orange, or can mean an orange and can also mean a red cow. But of course, cows don't become red, and that's why it actually clarified. So we're looking at an orange cow. All right, so it's an orange cow, and where it clarified it, the color is faqih. It's a plain orange cow, and whenever you see it, you'll recognize it. There's not much to it. You'll see it, you'll be able to recognize it, and that's it. Just slaughter a cow. But what did they do? And this is really common that you would see even within the Muslim community, and we're doing that stalking type of dialogue, in where it's not wanting to know the truth, but it's trying to go around in circles. قالوا ادع لنا ربك. So then they do it again. They say it again. So they said, call on to your Lord Almighty. Call on to your Lord. Let him tell us which cow is it. The cows, they're becoming so similar, we couldn't even tell the difference. And hopefully we will be guided. Were they serious? They definitely were not serious. And that's why they just said, إن البقرة تشابه علينا. And because this is the third time that they seek more and more descriptions, and they're just trying to really waste time. And that's why they said, إن البقرة تشابه علينا. It's like, we couldn't tell the difference. We weren't really sure which cow it is. They just all of a sudden seem to look alike. But they wanted to maintain Prophet Musa alayhi salam. So they said, inshallah la muhtadun. Hopefully we will be guided. And they weren't even really sure. So they said, inshallah la muhtadun. قال إنه يقول إنها بقرة لا ذلول. He said, answers the question. He said, that is Allah Almighty, that it is a cow that is not used, that's easy. In other words, it's not easy going, and it yet does not, what do they call it? I think it's called a tilling. Is it tilling? What was it called? When they actually start flipping the ground and flipping the earth, and in order to plant the ground, plant the earth. I forgot what it was called, but anyhow, so it doesn't, what is it? I don't think it's called sow the ground, is it? So sow the ground, yeah, and it does not, ولا تسقي الحرث, and of course, and it cannot, again, sow the ground, or sow the earth. مسلمة لا شية فيها. مسلمة لا شية فيها. It's basically all clear from any type of a disability, deformality. لا شية فيها. There's not any white hair in it. Well, since you wanted to make it hard, since you wanted more and more descriptions, all right, we'll give you more descriptions in where it's a very rare cow, in where there's no disability in it, and there's not a single white hair in it. There's not a single white hair. There's no other color. It's all an orange cow, nothing in it. قالوا الآن جئت بالحق. They said, now you have come with truth. Now we can realize that you really came with truth. So why did they say with truth and not with the right descriptions? They said with truth because they were there even doubting his prophethood still. Despite all that they had seen, despite all the miracles, when they had seen how Prophet Musa alayhi salam with his cane flips open the sea and with his, all the different miracles right before his eyes, but they were still doubting the miracles. They were still doubting the truth. فَذَبَحُوهَا. So then they slaughtered it. وَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. And they nearly didn't want to do it. They're still trying to procrastinate, still trying to stay away from applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is actually something that not only Bani Israel, but you will see, Nas'Allah al-afwa al-afiyah, you will see that many will actually live with this type of mentality in where they will say, well, I'm not really sure what Islam says about this. And when you say what Islam says about it, well, I'm not ready. I don't know if I am. I have to be spiritually ready, psychologically ready, and all these different things. And then they will tell you, my therapist told me not to rush. Sorry, my therapist told me not to rush. And this therapist, which ayah did she actually get that from? Which ayah did she get it from? Allah al-Musta'an. And we're right now seeing, is the therapist supposed to be, another prophet when we didn't know? Where did she get this from? وَإِذْ قَتَلْتُمْ نَفْسًا فَادَّارَأْتُمْ فِيهَا. That's when there's another miracle. So again, they were doubting the truth. وَإِذْ قَتَلْتُمْ نَفْسًا فَادَّارَأْتُمْ فِيهَا. And when you had killed a soul, فَادَّارَأْتُمْ فِيهَا. ادَّارَأْتُمْ, they had this argument, who was the killer? They were trying to look at and find the killer, but they concealed and literally hid the killer in order to manipulate Prophet Musa alayhi salam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then tells them to put it seems like it was some of the blood or from this cow that they had slaughtered. Somehow we don't really know the details of what they were ordered to do. According to the Old Testament, that they were supposed to put some of the blood from this cow that they had slaughtered over the person that they had killed, and then the person would come back alive and actually say who the killer was. The Quran didn't actually go in details about what really happened, because the whole story of all the different details of how did the person reveal, how did they find out from this cow and the blood of this cow and the person that killed, how did eventually that bring about the evidence, the clear evidence on showing who the real perpetrator was, who really the killer was. So it just said, Wallahu mukhrijum ma kuntum taktumun. So the ayat didn't really speak in detail like the Old Testament. It's talked about, the blood and how the blood was squirted on the body and all these different things. The Quran made it ambiguous, because the whole story and the whole reason for the story is how people, despite of seeing the haqq, this is the most important thing about the story in the Quran, is that despite seeing the haqq, they kept on stalking, they kept on trying to procrastinate and reinterpret haqq, reinterpret the truth and reinterpret haqq in order to stay away from applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَقُلْنَا ضْرِبُوهُ بِبَعْضِهَا. So here it is, this is the part where فَقُلْنَا ضْرِبُوهُ بِبَعْضِهَا, where the Quran was just saying that, they were ordered, the Baqara, the cow, and the dead person, that they were what is supposed to be struck against what? Was it the body to be struck against the blood for that cow, or was it the cow to be struck in the end? The Quran was, the whole issue is not given in detail, because that's not what's so important about it. It was so that they would see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were doubting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Prophet Musa alayhi salam, and that's when As-Sa'iqah had come to them. Then they doubted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken the mountain right before their eyes. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us how they doubted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ability to bring the dead back to life. So that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right before their eyes, made this person that was killed actually come back to life, in order for Bani Israel to come to see with their own eyes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of bringing the dead. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the dead back to life. And now you see the different signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if لعلكم تعقلون, in order for you to recognize the patterns that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had showed you, and recognize the patterns of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's powers. ثم قست قلوبكم, then despite the different evidences, despite the different miracles that they had seen, then ثم قست قلوبكم, then your hearts had become hard. Their hearts had become hard after that. فَهِيَ كَالْحِجَارَةِ, had become like stones, or even more solid. And from the stones and the stones and the rocks, there could be water gushing rivers from it, and some of it would crack and bring about water from within it, and some of it would actually fall from recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. And the Lord Almighty is not unaware of what you do. Now, what does that mean? A number of different things. So we just translated just the out of it. All right. ثُمَّ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُكُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ. So their hearts, why did it become qasiyah? Why did the heart actually become somehow hard? Well, the heart became hard because, remember, they didn't take the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala biquwwa. They were not taking it with power. They didn't announce the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They doubted the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then even when they knew the sharia, they actually didn't apply it, and they kept on reinterpreting. And that even when they knew the details, they basically started mocking the Prophet. So what happened? That all of it led to how their hearts became hard. Why? Because min ba'di dhalik, after all that they had committed, it became just like rocks. The rocks in here, the ayah says, أو أشد قسوة, or even harder. So then the ayah explains, why can their hearts actually be even harder? So that explains that because some of the rocks can even let water flow in between them, and it depends on the type of rock, it can actually burst water between it, and some of it can actually crack and let water go and flow in between it. And the word وَإِنَّ مِنْهَا لَمَا يَهْبُطُ مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ, but some of it would actually fall min khashyat Allah. There were a number of questions relating to this ayah. If the rock يهبط من خشية الله, is it that the rock felt khushu' and it fell? But the rocks don't think. So how is it يهبط من خشية الله? There are actually a number of different explanations relating to this ayah. Number one is that يهبط من خشية الله, meaning that just by the rock following the pattern of gravity, in where it goes based on gravity, goes based on the different laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in nature, that is a form of submission to the Lord Almighty. So that's why تهبط من خشية الله. What does that mean? Well, you apply the same idea by applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in life. By applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in life, you're actually practicing khashya min Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you apply sharia, that's going to let in the flowing of iman in you, just like the water would flow inside a rock. In other words, when you look at ألم يأن الذين آمنوا أن تخشع قلوبهم لذكر الله وما نزل من الحق ولا يكونوا كالذين أوتوا الكتاب. What happened to them? They forgot the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is forgetting the word of Allah? Forgetting the word of Allah, forgetting one, the recognition of the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the visual recognition, meaning mind recognition, intellectual recognition. Two, recognizing the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in practice, behavioral dhikr. And three, the dhikr in oral dhikr, in announcing. Remember, خُذُوا مَا أَتَيْنَكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ, and announce it and say it and remember it. All those different things are actually part of the dhikr. Now, on the other hand, when you're actually seeing right there, لَمَا يَهْبِطُ مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ, so when you actually apply the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's the first part, the second part of it, which is behavioral dhikr, that actually brings in the same type of pattern that you would see in nature. Nature, while the sun is rotating, while the moon is doing what it needs to, what it's supposed to be doing, the earth, the different plants, all these different things, just by following the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're actually doing a form of dhikr. Their form of dhikr is by applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered them to do. So here, لَمَا يَهْبِطُ مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ, that the rock would actually fall as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered it to, and that would be khushu'. Now, for you, you actually have free will. So just by applying the pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered you to follow, that is your form of khushu'. So when you actually apply the pattern of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of sharia, that's what is going to bring in the softening to the heart. وَمَا اللَّهُ بِغَافِلٍ عَمَّا تَعْمَلُونَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not, the word ghafil actually means unaware. The word ghafil actually means to be forgetful of something. The word ghafil also means to turn and be unaware of what happened. Be unaware of what happened. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forget what they do and does not and is unaware of what they're doing. And number three is basically in complete supervision over all that they do. أفتطمعون أن يؤمنوا لكم وقد كان فريق منهم يسمعون كلام الله ثم يحرفونه من بعد ما عقلوه وهم يعلمون. What happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then, of course, after all those different ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gets to the main reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us about Bani Israel. Are you really in hope that they would believe? When a group from them, they would hear the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they would reinterpret all the words of the Lord Almighty after they had understood it and they knew what the words were. What was it? The Bani Israel, they were telling the Arab at the time of a coming prophet, but then they reinterpreted the words and said that was supposed to be referring to a prophet from Bani Israel. So here, وَإِذَا لَقُوا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قَالُوا آمَنَّا. And when they meet those that believe, they would claim that they were believers. And then when they're in seclusion, they would just scold one another. Why did you tell them about the information that we have in our scriptures? Then you'll just give them more and more evidence in order to refute our words with it. In other words, Bani Israel were keen on not passing on information to the people within the Arabian Peninsula at the time, because they did not want any evidence to be coming at them to disprove what their claims were. And this is really important. This is not only This is not only Bani Israel at the time, but this is the same thing with Bani Israel even in Palestine. This is the policy that is actually being used even today, not only against the Prophet ﷺ, but this is also the policy that is used in the Israeli policy, in the policy AIPAC, you name those different groups. And even unfortunately right now, you're even seeing Muslims do the same thing, in where they will fall and make a narrative to support liberal, postmodern, etc. And what they eventually do, they basically try to hide a lot of the different arguments that support what we would say about Islam and etc. Well, that's a lot of times really because they had fallen weak. They did not take the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala biquwwa and did not yuzkuru ma fi, and unfortunately they did not mention what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually telling us in the Quran. And again, it is really sad to even see dua reinterpret Islam to suit the modern, postmodern narrative in order to seem as if they are moderate. Don't change the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to seem moderate. Say what Islam is. If you are not capable and you fear for your life, at least don't say what's batil. Remember, the whole reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was actually mentioning all these stories was really in order to tell us, hey, Muslimin, you too as well. Make sure that when you realize and you recognize haqq, make sure you take it with full power. Make sure you do the da'wah and you announce the truth, regardless of how others might perceive you, regardless of how others want to pressure you to change the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't change the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and recognize that whether it's political pressure as a result of as a result of il-hawa, a group of different people wanting to impose or wanting to bring advancement to a certain political or economical advancement, and would convince the masses in a certain way, and or other people are falling under some kind of dhann or speculation or a misconception, you as a Muslim, you as a mu'min, recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent with the anbiya il-wahi. And remember, يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ, they follow speculation. يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسِ. And what they desired, they either follow dhann, speculation, and they would call it studies had proven, وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسِ, and lobbying. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent you the revelation, had sent you the sharia, had sent you haqq. So in the end, خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ, take it with your power, with confidence, apply it, and there might be some pain, but you cannot gain al-akhirah unless you are actually taking the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with patience. And you have to be steadfast. It's not enough, and it doesn't mean that I've done my role and I was patient in 3 days, 4 days. It's going to take many, many, many years. You have to be steadfast in announcing al-haqq, وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ, and stay strong. And emphasizing the word biquwwa is not only in applying, but real strength is when you are ready to stand up and speak what the words are actually saying. This is the best of al-quwwa, is when you're standing up and saying, this is haqq and this is batil. But of course, when we're talking about saying this is haqq and this is batil, it's in the end, ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة. Call unto the path of the Lord Almighty. بالحكمة, there has to be wisdom. Do your research. Do your thinking. How can I convince these people? You got to do your homework and learning how to show the flaws of argument X or Y or Z. And then بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة. موعظة حسنة is when you actually speak in kind words. But don't confuse speaking in kind words and make a fool out of yourself, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells you in Surah Al-Rum, وَلَا يَسْتَخِفَّنَّكَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. Don't let those that don't have some that are not having that they're not serene, they're not sincere, they're not strong, they did not reach the yaqeen, in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't let them yastakhifuna, don't let them make you start acting like a fool. Don't let them dishonor you. You have to have izzah. You have to have the courage. You have to have the honor. You have to honor the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have to speak in full compassion, and you have to speak in full power. Don't let others ridicule you, and don't let others dishonor the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even dishonor you. So it doesn't mean that when you want to do da'wah, it doesn't mean that you let yourself get dishonored. So we actually did 2 pages today, which is good, alhamdulillah. Hopefully next week, inshallah, we'll do the same. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Sorry for for a couple minutes of going away in the middle of the session. So if there are any questions out there, I'd be happy to answer them, or if there are any things that you'd like to comment, I'd be happy to answer, inshallah.
Dr. Aisha, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Zamzam, how are you doing?
Good. So are you doing tafsir in person today?
So today, we haven't been doing tafsir in person because of COVID. Number one, the COVID surge is really big. We've had a number of different cases at the masjid, and of course in Minnesota as well. So we decided let's not do in person until further notice, inshallah.
Darn it. We missed you.
I missed everybody. I really miss doing it in person. It has a different vibe. I know that. It really has a different vibe.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Ustad, I was gonna ask the reason the Banu Israel slaughtered the cow was it because they killed a man? Was that the reason they were supposed to slaughter the cow?
So there are differences of opinions on whether they were just ordered to slaughter a cow, then this man gets killed and it happens to be, or whether because they killed the man, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered them to slaughter the cow in order to reveal the truth about it. So they had to show their sincerity. They had to reveal their genuine intention. So that's when they were ordered to slaughter the cow, in order to show that they're really sincere and not just wanting to just waste time and not really take the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seriously. So the Quran is really, I would say, not detailed, and doesn't really give all the different stories in detail. When it comes to a lot of the stories, it wanted to get to the theme of the story and not really the detail of what happened. So what came first? And that's why when you look at it in Mufassirin, when it comes to the stories of Bani Israel, when you look at it in Mufassirin, very many times they will go back to the books of Bani Israel in order to get information. I'm really against that, because you don't really need to get all that information, because the ayahs about the theme, the ayat are about the theme. So all the details really don't matter. It's not the details that matter. It's not that the Mufassirin were concerned. You had some Mufassirin that wanted more details, so they went to the books of Bani Israel, meaning the Old Testament and New Testament. I'm not pro with that, because anyways, the books of Bani Israel, they themselves, meaning the Bible and the Old Testament, they themselves recognize that it was not transmitted in a full authenticity, let me say it that way. So to actually go into, of course, even the Muslims don't even the Muslims recognize that, but there's really no need. The main theme is that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered them to do a certain practice, but they kept on procrastinating. They kept on trying to mock the Prophet, did not want to apply the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They reinterpreted the words, and that was the most important lesson for us to learn. Aisha, go ahead, Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sheikh, I missed the one part where you were talking about, I can't remember the ayah off the top of my head, where Musa alayhi salam, Prophet Musa responded to them. And you said, did Musa alayhi salam say it because of this or because of that? I can't remember. I missed that part. And then you said he said it for both reasons. Can you please explain that part again?
I think you were talking about قال أعوذ بالله أن أكون من الجاهلين.
Yes.
Right.
Go.
Yep. So it is actually recorded. You can go back to it. So you what we were talking about was really when he said أعوذ بالله أن أكون من الجاهلين, that in the end that Prophet Musa alayhi salam, because they were saying, hold on, let me see, right there's the ayah, because they were saying that أتتخذنا هزوا, are you mocking at us? So that's when Prophet Musa alayhi salam, so we have to look at the response. Why did he say أعوذ بالله أن أكون من الجاهلين? And that's what is the context of it? Well, the context of it was that they were basically accusing Prophet Musa alayhi salam of asking for something that is irrational, that doesn't make sense. So that's why he said, "A'udhu billahi an akuna minal jahilin." Was their accusation to Prophet Musa alayhi salam that he was being irrational, or was their accusation that he was saying something silly, or was it that he was saying something that he was saying that he himself, they were accusing him of being a person that is not basically, delivering the message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that would be right there, that kufr. So regardless of any of these three, in the end, just by accusing the Prophet of being silly or not interpreting the words of Allah Almighty right, in the end, that is a form of kufr. So Prophet Musa alayhi salam responds, "A'udhu billahi an akuna min al-jahilin," that he's not speaking of immaturity, he's not speaking or saying something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say. And that three is that Prophet Musa alayhi salam does not claim anything on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he did not say. All right, Zamzam, go ahead, Zamzam.
I just wanted to remind people of a good sadaqah business, sadaqatul jariyah. We have books to translate in English. If you want some gold business that never ends, please, Dr. Aisha shared a link. I'll try to put it in there again. Go ahead, and I do the monthly because I really want Jannah, and all I have right now is Amal. If you want $5, $10, $120, whatever you can, just donate. This is to translate books that are talking about atheism and postmodernism. Good business for us. So just a reminder to anybody here who's interested. I'm done, Dr. Aisha.
Allah yarda annik, jazakallah khairan, Zamzam. So we'll see you all, inshallah. Allah yarda annik, habibti. So we'll see you all, inshallah, next week. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.